Welcome to the Barrel Room. We're about to have a debate with Sean O'Keefe. Fortunately, I'm not moderating. Amanda Danielson is. Take it over.
We're really excited. Today we're talking about mostly which red grape variety Northern Michigan should hang its hat on. We're going to do that. People always talk about how can you make red wine up here? Well, we can't make everything up here, but there's a few varieties that are actually pretty extraordinary. Two of them who will be facing off with their representatives are Gamay Noir with Sean O'Keefe from Vineyards and Blaufränkish with Bryan Ulbrich of Charley. The truth is, just to give you some background on both of these, is they're very similar grape varieties. They're actually half siblings and structurally quite similar. As we talk about everything today, the hope is that you learn a little bit more about both of the grape varieties. We have some fun while we're here and decide or not which of these varieties we think would be something that could launch Traverse City like Pinot Noir did for Willamette Valley or Chardonnay for Napa Valley, California, etc. So with that, I'd like each of the gentlemen here to introduce themselves and the grape variety. Bryan, our host.
Hi, I'm Bryan Ulbrich from Charley, and I believe Blaufränkish is the greatest red grape variety to be planted on the Old Mission Peninsula since grapes were planted on the Old Mission Peninsula.
Hi, I'm Sean O'Keefe, and I don't even have, I just think Gamay is the best a priori. My dad planted it, I grew up with it, I didn't even have a chance to doubt it, so here I am.
I like your no chance for doubt. First of all, some of the viticultural characteristics I think are really important, and I'm just going to be sort of the provocateur if I can and tell you what some of the other people were saying. The first question was why not Pinot Noir? That's what everybody really wants. Bryan, would you like to go first?
All right, well, let's light the fire. I love Pinot Noir, great grape. I love it for still wines, for sparkling wines. I think that there's enough Pinot Noir in the world right now, and what is going on, we're looking for something to really kind of tweak the and add to the conversation of Michigan wine or Michigan's contribution to wine. And so for me, the answer is we need a different angle and something else to talk about. I think Blaufränkish brings the same body, the same complexity as Pinot, but kind of a different history and a different perspective in the end. So I vote for that.
Sean?
I think I would like to like Pinot Noir in this area too. Pinot Noir has always been treated as kind of the Olympics of winemaking, and the Burgundians have been very great at keeping that going for several hundred years and all that now. Pinot Noir does have that magic ability to reflect the small parcels that it grows on, but I would argue that Gamay and Blaufränkish as well is equally capable. And the main thing is that we're growing grapes here and not Burgundy or Sonoma Coast or Willamette Valley. We're growing where the glaciers dumped a bunch of sand, and we're on the edge of a pretty interesting climate. And from what I can see, when you think of some of these varieties, I think both of them do much better on sand, and we get this. But that's a discussion for later. I just think that Gamay is the one that's the most standalone one. Blaufränkish we'll talk about. I think it usually needs some help, some training wheels from other varieties, but that might just be where I'm coming.
This is high school, Sean. We'll get to undergrad like in the second half of the show. So Pinot Noir is obviously one of those that everybody knows. Cabernet Franc, there are many others. But when I was doing some research in preparation for this debate, something that came up over and over again is, well, nobody knows what Blaufränkish is. Nobody knows what Gamay Noir is. Blaufränkish obviously is a more challenging one because it's grown in a much more limited space. But Gamay, I think most people, at least those that spent much of the 80s and 90s with bud girls and berets case stacked in grocery stores in the third week of November every year, have some sense of the grape, if not the sense that we're talking about. So I'm curious if you would both take that. Sean, start with Gamay Noir and what you think the general consumer perception is of that, and then Bryan, the same for Blaufränkish.
Well, my father moved the whole family back here in the early 70s and planted Riesling that is widely considered, at least among a small group of people that seem to care about these things, as the premier white wine variety of the world. But my father planted in 74, and 75, and 76, and that's when everybody started connecting Riesling with Blue Nuns and Black Towers. And so growing grapes in northern Michigan and growing a grape that's considered sweet and insipid and something you move on from was one thing. So my father wasn't happy with that alone. Back in the late 80s, Beaujolais was selling a lot, Beaujolais Nouveaux and other things that were a big deal. And at that point, they were just like, a phenomenon. They were selling a lot of wine, a lot of not that interesting wine. And also the market fell out of that as well. So why not plant it in Michigan at that time, right when Beaujolais was starting to get a really bad rap again. So my father just likes difficult things, I guess. But if you do something well, and you did your research and you have a little bit of luck and plant the right thing in the right place, and manage to stay in business for 10 or 20 years making this, eventually people come around and understand it. And we're just seeing now with the Gamay of just what old vines can do. And I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Well, I would say for the sommeliers and out there, people who have those bottle shops that are looking for less expensive alternatives to Pinot Noir or just fun examples that are comparable in structure to Pinot Noir, Cru Beaujolais has actually seen quite a resurgence in the last several years, and that's something we can talk about too.
Well, the thing is high acid red wines.
Right.
Both of these are famous for having acidity as one of their main core things, and for the longest time, Gamay and Blaufränkish were confused. I mean, I think in Bulgaria they called Blaufränkish Gamay.
It's Gamay, J-A-M-E with an accent to you. About Blaufränkish, sorry. So I know it's the worst thing ever.
There's an umlaut on the A.
There's an umlaut.
Let the A,
Speak French.
let the A live. So the thing I loved about Blaufränkish, we started planting that in 2001 as trying to find a red grape that could express the area and also be beneficial to the farms we were asking to grow it for us. And what I like about it is that you go into a lot of places with a blank slate, and it's not preconceived notions of what Blaufränkish should be. I think we're still, as a wine culture, understanding what this grape is, and this gives us a chance to let our terroir and what we're doing winemaking wise express itself. And so we're not backlogged by the immense history of something, though it has a great history. It's just that we can kind of help tell that story through a new world expression.
So we just created a drinking game that every time I say Blaufränkish instead of Blaufränkish, our viewers are going to take a drink. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll be fine. We'll see how that ends up. Who needs Roxanne? It did come up in the questions from Facebook Live about Cabernet Franc. We addressed Pinot Noir as why not Pinot Noir. Well, why not Cabernet Franc?
Well,
go ahead.
We have Cabernet Franc, and I love it.
Just kidding. Sorry.
When it ripens, it's great, and it's a good grape up here. It has a lot of potential in any vintage, and you can do a lot with it. And I think it's a great arrow in the quiver, if you will. But I think Blaufränkish has a little more of an emphatic statement to make, being grown up here than Cab Franc does. Not that I'm getting rid of our Cab Franc vineyards, but I think year in and year out, I can rely on Blaufränkish to ripen in a full slate of possibilities, from rosé to a light, bright, fruity red to a more aged, barrel kind of conditioned, long-term thinking wine. So I like that range of being able to rely on it. And then the last thing about that is that I don't have to ask our growers to thin the crop down to some ridiculous number that's not economically sustainable, because Blaufränkish likes to grow here, so it needs to produce. You need crop on there, and that helps out farms as well, so it kind of comes back both sides.
So it's interesting, because when we start talking now about like viticultural viability up here, whether we're talking about Bordeaux varieties like Cabernet Franc or these what some people would consider more obscure as far as the mainstream being Gamay Noir and Blaufränkish, one of those things that I was thinking about and that came up a lot in this research was, why are we doing it and why are we choosing what we grow? And so Sean, we'll let you take this to start, but why would we choose something? Because it's easier, right? Because Gamay is easier, Blaufränkish is easier than say Pinot Noir or Cabernet Franc.
Well, we all talk about terroir and trying to be true to your area, but nobody ever believes it. They always try to force the issue in this country and all that. Gamay, and you can already see my cards on the table, Blaufränkish too. They seem to do well. First of all, the first thing you have to think in Northern Michigan, every terroir is not just all positives, it's also limiting factors. In this case, we're in the era of disaster, so maybe forest fires and hail in Burgundy or floods in the Rhone are kind of the new thing. Up here, it's winter temperatures. We get very, very cold temperatures in the winter that are not typical of Europe in this last couple decades, and other times in history it was. So the first thing we have is just be able to survive a winter where we get 20 below 0 Fahrenheit once or twice a decade. Gamay is, from what I can see from the research I've seen from Michigan State, from other places, it's probably the most cold hardy red. It's almost up to Riesling levels of being able to handle winter, and that is an advantage.
There's some disagreement about that, my friend.
I watch it, but it's.
We'll get there.
Okay, I know who you've been talking to. Anyways,
Are you saying fake news?
Well, I'm not saying fake news at all. I'm saying that we have like the OG Blau growers on here, being Bill and Margaret McDonald, and so there's some question. But we'll keep going.
We'll get to that. I mean, we're only, we're a young wine region. There's a room for different opinions, but
we're also like 20 minutes in here. So.
Oh, well, so if we have something that survives winter, then the other factors come into is that what about cooler years? What about warmer years? Can I make wine in all years? And with Gamay and other of these kind of medium-bodied, high-acid reds, you could also Petit Rouge or Pinot d'Anis, all these kind of other things could probably grow here. But these are the ones that at least Gamay is one that my father plants, so I've been focusing on it. And it also, it survives winter. It can make into light wines, it can make sparkling wine, it can make heavier wines if you keep the crop down. You can maybe flirt a little bit of oak, maybe not too much. And you can make kind of reserve-y styles if that's your bailiwick. And I can also, and we'll try 2019 at some point, Gamay, where we had a year where summer almost never came, or at least it was here, but fall came and it was cold. And the wines, even, I didn't chaptalize, I made 11% alcohol Gamay, and it tasted beautiful, whereas Cabernet Franc and other things required a little more winemaking to make that happen. Lastly is if you got those things where you have, it survives winter, you have economic choices, you can make different things, and you're acknowledging that we have a shifty climate, does it really speak and smell and taste of something up here? Does it have a reason for being that it smells and tastes different than Beaujolais or Loire Valley or Oregon or wherever else is growing it? And here we tend to get this black pepper character that comes in both Gamay, Blaufränkish, and a few other varieties. And it's such a beautiful thing, and to be able to light wine that has layers to it is something that we can do here. And also, I haven't tried Gamay anywhere else in the United States that comes close to some of the things we've done here. We don't have a wide sample. And Blaufränkish has that possibility as well, but I'm arguing the other side, so I can't say that. So anyways.
So just to what I alluded to before, there was one comment that both grapes do have the potential to survive our cold and difficult winters, occasionally cold and difficult winters. Blaufränkish probably a little bit more so, and it's better to, oh, there you go, drinking game. I didn't say I would drink if I said Blaufränkish. Blaufränkish has a better chance overall if you were actually to bet money on what's going to be the one that will be most viable, vintage after vintage under the worst of times. Gamay is a close second to that. However, it was said, and I'm going to let Bryan take this one, that Blaufränkish can never make quite the damn! Blaufränkish can never make, I'm going to have a shirt made with just an umlaut, can never make quite the wine of distinction that Gamay Noir is capable of doing.
Oh, yeah, that's ridiculous. I don't know what news you're reading, but that's terrible. I think that it can make wines a distinction, and I think the problem with Blaufränkish Michigan, but in Michigan, is that we have not had enough time to let these wines fully age. And I think that if you let Blaufränkish do its thing in the bottle, and you take the time, and I'll admit I've released very young Blaufränkish, I'm not sure. It needs to age, it needs time, and I think that complexity comes. It's a slow aging wine. The black pepper qualities that my colleague is talking about are part of what makes it a wine that ages really well. And so as we grow as an industry and we keep getting more sites planted and find some of the complexities in there, you're going to see that these wines that we started on, years ago will start to reveal their real complexity over time. So I think it is part of that pantheon of great aging red wines. We just, as a young industry, are just getting to the point where we can actually explore what a 10-year-old Blaufränkish actually tastes like.
But Austria is not young.
Right.
They've been growing Blaufränkish for a really long time.
Yes, but I was doing a lot of research, at least in the last hour before this debate, and I went down a few rabbit holes. Instead of reading about Gamay and touching up on my cruise and things, I ended up going into the Blaufränkish realm. And I read a lot of old things, that when I was first learning wine in the early 90s, when I was actually importing Zweigelt and Blaufränkish St. Martin and Traverse City, which was a great idea at the time, but it was not a great idea, economic great idea at the time. But when you look at what like Jancis Robinson and other people, is that their Blaufränkish was automatically, just like somewhat Gamay, like Gamay is inferior to Pinot Noir, but if you can't grow Pinot Noir, you might as well grow Gamay and Beaujolais. That was the attitude there. And when you talk to the German textbooks, Blaufränkish is like something that might be good, but it's somewhere between Portuguese, which was like kind of this like really coarse, simple wine, which will probably have a comeback now that
You just said it.
yeah, I know now. Probably Portuguese or
People are planting it.
piquettes are on the way. But anyways, it's somewhere between Portuguese and Pinot Noir. And they always treated it like it was somewhere like, it could be good, but it's not ever gonna be good as Pinot, and it's more closer to a coarse peasant type grape. And that was all in the 90s, and I looked, and even Austrian reds back then, in Burgenland and all that, they, Blaufränkish wasn't really well respected even back then. And when people did start working with it, they tried to go in the Bordeaux model. They were growing Cabernet Sauvignon in the Noisette, the new settlers.
Noisy-Bercy.
Yeah, but what's it called in English?
The big flat lake.
Anyway, Noisette. So anyways,
It's just a giant flat stuff lake.
so they were putting too much oak, Cab Sauv, blending Blaufränkish in as like kind of the Merlot substitute. And then as you notice, what's happened over time is that it's extracted itself from that, and people started finding old clones of Blaufränkish, and some of the people like Umafum are saying that basically they think that some of the Blaufränkish actually went through genetic degradation, where these big cluster Blaufränkish are not typical of things in the past, because they have ones that look like Pinot, and if you look at the old text, they said that Blaufränkish and Pinot were a lot more similar, small compact bunches. So there's all kinds of things like that are interesting on that.
That is interesting. We have two different clones in one of our vineyards, and one is decidedly smaller in terms of berry structure and what it's presenting as a cluster. And I think at this point too, when you talk about Pinot, even Cab Franc, in the sense we have this clonal understanding of what has been available in America, and we don't have that with Blaufränkish. You get Blaufränkish, and we're starting to see some splits on how they actually grow, what the clusters look like, and then the resulting wines. At this point, we don't have the critical mass of making this yet to really have definitive answers on what clone is best here.
It brings up a really good point too about clonal selection, because even when we were first talking about, I think it was just not that long ago, we have a new winemaker up here more recently that's really interested in doing Gamay, and I was asking about the importance of clonal selection for Gamay Noir compared to that of Pinot Noir, which is probably the most notorious grape as far as like all the 667, 677, Dijon, blah, 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 right? I mean, there's 1,000 clones that even run-of-the-mill sommeliers like myself are familiar with. But Gamay, we don't actually talk about clonal selection, certainly not Blaufränkish. So I'm curious how much of that is right now, like yes, you said it's just starting, but maybe Blaufränkish is just a smidge behind Gamay in that, because Gamay is closer to Pinot Noir in general, where as far as region where clonal selection is really important.
I think a lot is we're in the United States, and there's a monopoly on bringing grapes in from several breeding stations, and to be able to bring them in, you have to put a lot of money up and be very patient. There's all kinds of clones of Gamay available in Canada, because they have a stronger connection with France and better rotation laws. Probably Blaufränkish too. I haven't looked at that in this country, because the people who are interested in these kind of varieties are more in the east, and we're tinier vineyards. There hasn't been much of interest in bringing things in. If I wanted to plant Gamay right now, I have the option of two clones. 358, and I can't remember the other one. Or I source from my family's vineyard, but I don't know what's mixed in there because there's probably Napa Gamay and Baldigui and all that kind of, and Gamay Beaujolais as well. Blaufränkish, there's only two clones I see that are available right now, 01 and 002. You know?
Right, yeah. And what you get, it's almost more nursery based in terms of what the end results will be, but then you're talking 5-year learning curve on that too, so.
So I think for most of our viewers, that gets to like that definite 2.0 level, but it's important to note that both of these grape varieties are a little bit behind the viticultural understanding in terms of that level of
the research.
technicality of, say, Cabernet Franc or
There's
Pinot
a ton of research behind it right now. It's been a lot of anecdotal. I mean, we put Blaufränkish in. I mean, largely, Sean, not that. I guess tasting Zweigelt with you and the stuff you were bringing in, and Blaufränkish in those early days, last century when we were tasting together.
Last century.
That was exposure, and then tasting some other random spots where it was being grown was kind of the leader to us just to try it. Just so, could you find it? Yeah, sure. Put it in the ground. Let's see what happens. And that was 20 years ago, and now we're looking at finally seeing some results. And so, all of this is a long-term perspective. And fortunately, Chateau Grand Traverse putting in Gamay when they did, got the game rolling, and then others have followed too. Interestingly, though, a lot of wineries that planted Gamay after that period have not really pushed it as a single varietal. It's been kind of a filler red one. I think you're seeing more acceptance from the buyers and from the people that are looking to present wines at their restaurants or their wine shops or their Thanksgiving table or whatever it is to talk about some of these more interesting and kind of off varieties, and that's helping us as well to get this conversation moving forward.
Well, in part this year from Michigan, Northern Michigan, Old Michigan, or Leelanau, or the new regions in Torch Lake and North, is why run to the center on things? Why I like varieties that are hard to pronounce and make people think about them on their own merit and not have a frame of
You read
reference.
Dostoevsky regularly. You might not be the
More of a Tolstoy these days, but yeah.
It might not be the exact replica of most of the wine drinking population up in Northern Michigan.
No, but my big revelation was about, was it 2020 now? Probably about at least 15 years ago. We were establishing my family's wine, Chateau Grand Traverse in New York, and I was able to get our Gamay Reserve at Aquavit, which was this really hot, this is where Marcus Samuelson, when he was still the chef there and all that, but high-end herring restaurant in Midtown, and they were serving our Gamay Reserve, thanks to a Michigan expat, Sean Kirby. It was like upper 20s or mid 20s a glass at the time, and with herring. And I thought, and the Rieslings, all these other beautiful wines I had, they blew right over them. They wanted the Gamay. The only critique was our wine, not so much at Aquavit, but the stores, is that our wine was too cheap, and work on the labels a little bit. I was like, go in the microphone so I can tell my brother that. But and I started realizing at that point that sometimes obscure or something that's a little out on the fringe is actually our strength. And instead of always trying to go to the center and growing Bordeaux varieties and other things that we're doing our best to do something interesting with, is actually just have a certain acceptance that some of these things are going to be hard to pronounce and we're going to have to pioneer them. And that's kind of once you make that decision and go down that path, it's pretty liberating. And
well, it is, and I want to say too, just as I think generationally, we talked about 20 years ago and all those changes,
Yeah.
well, we've all been in this industry for far more than that, obviously. That's fine, we're fine. But when we think about, there's this new generation, I think, of sommeliers as well, that are a lot more open-minded, where people used to come up here and ask all the time, where can I get a Cabernet Sauvignon? I drink Napa Cab, that's what I want, where can I get that? And I think that our industry in Northern Michigan tried to do that a little bit, right? Tried to create wines that we couldn't actually create because we're where we are in terms of like distance from the equator, but also all the things, right? There's just terroir, we don't need to get into that discussion. But when we talk about identity, it's important not to try to be something we can't possibly be, right? But does it make sense to try to even hang our hat on a single varietal?
no.
Okay, so we'll get back to why we're having this discussion in a
I think we
minute,
can.
but why not,
Why not?
Brian?
We're too young to pigeonhole ourselves at this juncture. I mean, the fact that Sean's a second generation in the industry I think tells a lot. It's that we're fortunate to have a second generation right now, and
We're still the young generation of winemakers, which is kind of sad.
yeah, I know. Except the other day I was hanging out with some very well-respected colleagues, and they considered me one of the old guys, which I thought was awesome.
Well, that's why I got rid of
Then
the
I
beer.
also kind of like cringed a little bit.
That's why I got rid of the beer.
Yeah, but the fact is that we're still learning this whole thing, and so we need this allowance, and a lot of what we're trying to do is for the grandkids and all that, that will someday take all the stuff we've done and be like, well, that was stupid, why did you plant that, why did you do that? And this is what really grows here. Throw in climate change, or however you want to phrase it politically, but the fact that the world is different now climatically than it was even 20 years ago is offering both new perspectives and opportunities, and also limiting what we thought we could do too. So, you know, I think we're in that phase of, we're the ones that they'll talk about years from now. If you go into these old markets and taste with, you know, in Europe, or even taste in the U.S. with importers, and they will always talk about the great grandfather started this winery, and oh, you know, how the kids carried it on, and we're the great grandfathers in that sense, and so we need this latitude of opportunity to experiment, and find out what works, and then and try to you know, propagate that style and see what happens.
How hard is it for people in general, just in the industry, to let go of stuff that doesn't work? Because it might conform to a consumer
Well,
ideal.
we're not able to, at least at this point, to graft over vines like they do in the West Coast, where this variety's not hot anymore, so we're gonna bud graft, and you know, in 2 years or 1 year, we're gonna have a different variety. So when something is planted in the ground, it pretty much is there for the next 30 years until you finally, you know, rip the thing up and plant something else. So in a lot of cases, like at this point in my life, I thought I'd be growing only Gamay in about 4 or 5 different vineyards, and Riesling in 4 or 5 different vineyards, and specialized. A little Pinot Blanc and Gruner to play around with. Instead of growing like 34 different varieties, you know, some of them never been grown in the United States before.
Yeah,
And
you're
then
throwing
instead of-
Nebbiolo and Sangiovese.
But then comes the idea of the blend, and here's where it gets interesting in the sense is that we don't have all the genetic diversity that some of these areas in Europe that are rediscovering their roots and finding all the things and all that. They have an advantage over us, and that's wonderful, but we're gonna do our best. What we can do interestingly here, and we haven't talked about this, is how you blend Blaufränkish, how you blend Gamay. I personally believe Gamay is a better standalone variety than Blaufränkish, but that's just because I'm on this side of the room.
Take an intermission.
The Blaufränkish, for some reason, I know it doesn't have Syrah parentage, but it does. It seems to bring out more of those allspice and grapey elements, where Gamay just seems to be a little bit lighter on its feet with that peppery thing coming out. But that's from a very small source sample, because what Gamay is going to compare? My family's, Big Little stuff, your recent one, that's it. And then what I'm doing at Mari. So Blaufränkish, we have a little bit more people doing things at Shady and Del Lago and other places.
So I can start just to say that, you know, when I did the what is planted, there's actually significantly more Gamay planted than Blaufränkish.
Really?
Yeah.
It's all at Cheddar and Travers then, because
There's a lot of blenders out there.
13 total acres in
Oh, yeah.
Michigan for
There's more than that.
Gamay. I'm sure there is now. These are what I have from 2017 numbers.
yeah.
So it's 2017. Wine takes a long time. 29 Gamay Noir in Michigan. But where was all that Gamay Noir? I mean, I know there's more of both now, but it's a very different.
Cheddar and Travers, the little part that Black Star owns next to Kern's house.
That was half.
The remainders that Mark Johnson planted Chateau Chantel, and then later what Pete and Mike planted out at Mauby, and that was it. And then what I planted at Mari.
So let's talk about blending. I think that's a good topic because obviously Bordeaux, if we go to something that a lot of people know, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot primarily, a couple other varieties, it can be blended in there. Almost everything is a blend. Let's talk about blending. We're talking about varietal wines here, varietal Gamay Noir, varietal Blaufränkish. But what value do you see in that, especially in a region like ours? Want to go first, Bryan?
I would love to experiment with blending Blaufränkish if I had more. We don't have enough right now. And so what we have goes into single varieties. I've played around with Cab Franc blends since 2005, so there's definitely a relationship there that can work well for both varieties, back and forth. I would think, Merlot that I've had up here would be great with Blaufränkish. I think it's very versatile for accepting that kind of relationship with another grape. I do believe believe that as a standalone grape, though, variety, it needs time, and that it has its complexity, but it's going to take a while in the bottle, and patience from winemaking as well, and barrel selection and barrel aging and all of that, I think is important. You can play a lot of games with oak, but one of the best is to play older oak and let it do its thing. So I think it's a maturing process there. As far as other, blending Gamay and Blaufränkish, I don't know. It could be kind of interesting too.
So you have used to tending more toward varietal stuff, but obviously made a shift toward blending as well. We're tasting a few of those.
Well, where Blaufränkish comes from, less Gamay. Gamay is more monovarietal. You see it blended with Pinot Noir and Pasta Grams and stuff like that, but those are wines that are almost never.
2017 bestiary.
Well, yeah, I'm getting there. I'm a David Foster Wallace footnotes kind of guy. I'm trying to keep it short.
We're going for music references. We're getting Tolstoy and David Foster Wallace.
We'll get there. When we're talking about giving an identity to our region, finding varieties, and also going back to giving up some varieties that might be evolutionary dead ends. One thing I've noticed in the last couple of years is, well, for example, both Blaufränkish and Gamay Noir, but I also like Petit Rouge in Val d'Aosta, or there's all these regions in the subalpine areas that have these, or alpine areas have these cool climate reds that have acidity, and they usually have a black pepper element to them too. And so we happen by history, because of my father's fascination with Gamay, and then a lot of us had the Austrian fetish and still do, that we have these things growing here, but there are other ones in other parts of the world. The key thing though is that they're not typically heavy reds, the ones where alcohol and there's layers to some of these bigger Bordeaux-based wines or Rhone-based wines. But Blaufränkish and Gamay can do these things too, but on a much lighter frame, with acidity being a key factor. And for a long time, people didn't like acidity in reds because they associated it with fringy climates, or it was bigger and softer and more plushy pillows, the better.
Lack of opulence.
Yeah, but there's layers in these wines too, and that's what we're trying to do in the age thing, is that you can have a wine that's refreshing, doesn't have completely grippy tannins, they tend to be softer tannins in both of them, but they have layers to it, and they also have that freshness, which is getting more and more difficult in Europe these days because it's so freaking warm over there. We've kind of moved up a little bit climatically from all the data I've seen, especially that stuff that Stuart Pickup was showing, and we're able to make these refreshing reds that might not even be possible in their traditional places where they come from, because Austria is pretty freaking warm. So is Gamay or Beaujolais these days. So it's kind of exciting that way. And then one thing on the blending is, okay, we don't have all these different clones and things, we don't have the history here, but we can do some interesting things. Like, for example, in Südtirol, they grow grind, and the grind is very tannic, very coarse, very inky red wine, and it doesn't really stand on its own, so they blend in this kind of more softer wine called Trollinger, or Grenache, or Schiavo, whatever you want to call it. I don't grow Trollinger here, I don't want to grow Trollinger, but I like that style, so I grow the grind, but I use Gamay, which has those softer tannins and other things, so I'm not aping what they're doing in Südtirol or Friuli or Hungary or wherever, but I'm switching some things out that I'm able to do as an American, because the Gamay takes the place of the Trollinger, and I achieve the same process of softening some of those coarse tannins and making a really good red. And that's where it gets fun in the new world here, of making those odd combos that people wouldn't do before because it just wasn't part of their history.
Well, it's not wouldn't, but also couldn't, because there's a lot more regulation in the old world too that requires certain minimums, maximums, and whatever.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit to oak too, because I think that's a big conversation when it comes to wine. And one of the things I had recently, Bryan, is I had the opportunity to have your 2019 straight Blaufränkish without any, or minimal oak, or just neutral oak, and then your reserves, both 18 and 17. And that was really interesting to see the influence of not only vintage variation, but also how each of those vintages took to the oak. And 19 being a slightly leaner year, I was curious if you made a reserve in that year, if it's in barrel right now, and if it's something we'll look forward to. And how do you manage when you have a leaner year? Because I find so often, especially in these, like, when people are shooting for a style rather than honoring what's coming in the cellar door, often the shoulders of that particular, of the juice isn't quite, they aren't quite broad enough to carry the jacket, so to speak.
And that's one of the beauties of Blau, is that you can mitigate, like going into 2019, for example, I knew that we were not dealing with one of the grander vintages. And so our choice was to press a little bit early. We weren't going to try to extend our skin contact later, because as you get more alcohol, you're starting to degrade other compounds, and we just didn't have the raw material there to push the style. So we chose pretty early that we would not have a reserve. So within the whole fermentive kind of game of whatever the 2 and 3 week period that was, we sort of made a decision not to go that direction. But we knew also we had enough fruit and ripeness to get a bright, easy drinking red wine that would be fun for its youth and probably will continue to age really well, but it didn't have to go the length. And then in years like 17 and 18 and even this year, we're seeing differences within the vineyards that we can try to accent or use through, like extend through skin contact or barrel aging. And so it provides a lot of versatility in that sense of it's not going to be it's not going to be by choice when things come in. But being in our climate that we are, I need that flexibility. And when we have a year like 19, I'm confident we can make both a really interesting red wine and a really interesting rosé, both from ripe fruit, not that the rosé is cast off. It's that we can choose to make rosé and choose to make a red wine. And then when we're really fortunate, we have years like this year or 17 or 8, 16 even too, we can kind of try to push the window on it and draw more out of the fruit and in the effort to make a wine that will have more like layers and depth and complexity and need aging, and possibly the influence of oak that would add suppleness to that.
Was there any oak in the 19 at all?
It was all oak, yeah.
But the 19 was all neutral?
No, well, yeah, it was all second. Well, no, we had some new barrels in there too. But it was
lean and bright and pretty.
Yeah, it was shorter. Everything was, we knew it was going to be shorter. We left, the way we pressed and then put it in with lees so we could have some lees contact, knowing that it would be help with the mouthfeel, and kind of just took that course right from the start. Whereas like this year, we're looking at one of our vineyards, we're going to leave for another probably 2 weeks on skins. Seeds were ripe. I want to kind of pull some of that out. I know that means I'm going to limit my window for bottling, so that's going to be most likely into a reserve edge of what we do. And so when we look at our barrel selection at that point, we're going to choose what barrels we want for that style as well. And so as a winemaker, without having recipes and the ability to really control what the hell you're doing, it's nice to have this flexibility and versatility to make you respond to what you need to do to have interesting wine.
I love that. One of the things I like about both of your winemaking and having been buying and tasting wine up here for well over 20 years, I too feel like that it's that flexibility that I think is the mettle of the winemaker, so to speak, just from a buyer's perspective. And just flipping to now Gamay, we tasted recently a vertical of the varietal Gamay Noir, 17, 18, 19 side by side, and the 3 wines couldn't be more different. 17 and 19 had more similarities, but 19 was very much like the lighter it was like 17 light, but still extraordinary.
It's about 10.8% alcohol.
So we're talking about consumers though here too, and I think when people get this, just 2 things, and I want you both to address both points, but I'll give them to you. One is addressing that lighter wine, that lighter style. Is it lesser quality because it's so very light? Also, just ageability is so, I'm really excited creating this retail program right now, and I'm getting access to like older Sauvignon Blanc from Chile, and older wines from here, and things where I feel like consumers are like, ooh, gosh, that's 4 years old, is it still gonna be good? And it's like, well, yeah, it's gonna be extra. Are you kidding me? It's like starting to sing. So I'd like you both to address the question of first, vintage variation, and second, aging in general.
Vintage variation, and the reason I like Gamay and to a lesser extent Blaufränkish is that even at cool years where you might only have something of potential alcohol of 11.5%, they don't smell like jalapeno peppers or bell peppers and things. They don't, that Bordeaux varieties usually do, without the proper canopy work. So what I like is I'm trying to be as much of a terroirist as I'm able to do in a young wine region. And so when we have these really cold regions, it was a real kind of a gamble with the Gamays. I'm not going to chaptalize anything. I'm not going to add sugar to boost up the alcohol to it. I'm going to try to just take it as it is and see if I can make a beautiful or something very pleasurable out of it. And it did. And that's to me a first test of a variety that should plant somewhere where we're not having to gussy it up. It still made something really good. Now, the quality to price ratio is something, that's, we're dealing with wine, and it's very, very expensive to make wine in any year, whether it's the best year or a lesser year. In fact, the costs go up in lesser years. So if at some point we do go up against, like, can I get an equivalent price one from Beaujolais or from the Loire, that might be as good or better. In some cases you might, but it's not going to taste the same and be the same. And part of me trying to play with the vintages, or actually just play with them and lean in with our weird weather, is instead of always trying to apologize for being from northern Michigan, is actually make that kind of our little bit of that chaos and a little bit of that shift around, so that we're able to every year know how to make the wines in a good way that matches the year. That sounds so vague, but it's a confidence that wasn't, at least I didn't have that early on. We were always trying to put some makeup on the wine so that people didn't get a little bit of acid or a little bit of an edge or this and that, because we felt that people weren't able to deal with that. Right. And they are now, and that's where I think it's kind of cool with, I think tastes have really changed from when I entered the wine market, where, I remember the years where people would only drink Bordeaux and Burgundy and they'd slum it with Rhone, let alone a California place.
I'd like to slum it with some co-rotation.
Yeah, I know, but
I had some pick of success, if I can say that.
You dealt with the older generation like that, and then it was Napa, Colt Cabs, and other things, but Michigan was always, our region is as old as most of the modern wine industry in the United States, so it's not like we're in Johnny come lately, it's just that we're kind of isolated up here. And I just think now we have the confidence to actually make wines that come, and even with our kind of some of the oddball years, just go with it. And these varieties are the best ones for that. They really are able to make wines from ripe to even on borderline, and who doesn't love that,
Well, the delicate red wine is as interesting and fascinating as a big red wine for its own reasons. It's sort of like comparing a butterfly wing to an eagle's wing. But the butterfly flies a lot farther than the damn eagle does. Sorry, not the damn eagle. The eagle does. They circle, right? Butterfly flies all the way across the country. Goes down to Mexico and 3 winters, and then comes back up. But that's a tiny little wing you can break with a windshield wiper. So it's not necessarily strength and bigness makes it interesting. Some of it's the journey it takes and all that. And that's a little more like painting on velvet right now. But I think that delicate wines are really showing their, or getting a chance to show their merits because people are more interested in that kind of that texture relationship, as well as the aromatics, and then with the way people are eating too. It doesn't have to be all just bacon fat these days. So, and I do like bacon.
Well, I love that, and I know too, just from a food pairing perspective, obviously it's the wines that have higher acid typically, and just a little bit, I would say, balanced in those structural elements of acid, sugar, tannin, alcohol, that tend to pair more universally well with foods of all types. I think charcuterie would be delicious to have any of the wines that we're really tasting right now. But if you had a big heavy cab, beautiful, with that bright, maybe not so much like say the 17 Reserve in its youth, but then that has the opportunity to evolve. And so just what you were talking about, the butterfly versus the eagle, which I think is a beautiful metaphor, I'm curious about just that, really just talking again about that variability in vintage, and then how the consumer, you see it in the tasting rooms, and in the restaurants, people drink what we put on their table. For you guys in the tasting rooms, I think people are asking questions, and I'm curious how you feel about, what's your vocabulary in communicating those differences and why we're not Napa, or why we're not Willamette Valley, or why we're not Bordeaux?
I think this is one of the great happenings of the last several years, is that Michigan wineries in general have recognized the value of service and delivery, and that Sean and I can ruminate about this stuff all day long. We can hang out in this very room with nobody else around and feel like we've conquered all the world's problems by having a few bottles of wine and talking it out, but it means absolutely nothing unless it's delivered. And so I think one of the things that wineries have done really well, in addition to investing in vineyards and wine production and all the things we need to actually bring great wine to people, is that we're getting it at the service end. And so we rely on our tasting room staff, on our salespeople, everyone, and the distributors and people that get engaged with what we're doing to be able to relay that message out. And they're way better at it than I am. Sean's pretty awesome at it, but I'm not a great salesperson.
Oh, yeah, right.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that. No. So but the point being is that people are coming up here to learn. You know, yes, there's people coming up to party, but if you're coming up to learn about wine, they're getting it at the bar side. They're getting it from the people, from the restaurants to the tasting rooms to distribution, and all of that is. There's a sense of exploration and excitement, and that's being delivered, and so you can learn about all that kind of stuff through their interpretation and delivery, and that's as vital as all the stuff we put into the vineyards. If
So
that answers the question.
Well, there's also the shifts in where you take your inspiration from. I mean, now there's enough, getting to be enough winemakers here and styles and things that I can actually reference other styles within our own region. Like typically we went back to the old world or whatnot, and that's still, we were so Bordeaux focused because it's just, that's what you did with reds at some point, at least in the 90s. And having the Loire Valley or Burgundy or Beaujolais and all these other areas, or Friuli, to be inspirational is it's kind of a recent thing as well, since at least the early 2000s and all that. And I mean, kind of take inspiration from the other edgy regions, the ones that are pushing the borders. And I think we're one of those. We're on this northwest frontier of the Great Lakes, where we're bordering right up against a pretty harsh continental climate, but we're able, that magic window to grow things here. Even with things like Cabernet Franc we mentioned before, it grows side by side with Gamay Noir and Navarre. 19, some of the things you learn is that why not make Cabernet Franc like trying to make like Cabernet Sauvignon or something in Bordeaux? Why not learn from the Loire Valley winemakers and actually make almost a Pinot style? Don't go for color, go for whiter and fruitiness, and all of a sudden you discover something that's been in front of your eyes the whole time. If you've been in Paris, we had a Vin Rouge from the Loire, it's very delightful. Cabernet Franc doesn't have to be this beast. And it's these things that we're trying to find in this area and starting to figure it out, that there's a certain delicacy and lightness in our wines, and let's not apologize for it anymore, and just really work on that. I think that's what we're seeing.
I think that's a really great point, and it's actually a fantastic segue into a question that came up on Facebook Live about ageability. First, I want to mention some of the things that we have in the bottle, because there's so much. Sorry, none of it's available, but membership has its privileges. But Blaufränkish, the McDonald's are watching right now. I mentioned them earlier, and the 2016 is actually specifically from their vineyard, and it is extraordinary. I mean, it's really delightful. Maybe two things, Brian, maybe talk a little bit about the 16 vintage, the importance of these relationships with growers and that vineyard management, and just the 16 and how it's evolving, because this is amazing. We talked about 17 and 18 and 19 a little bit, but it's like brand new.
Yeah, the 16 is from not quite an acre of grapes. It was the 1 year, it was the rebound year after 2 years of no crop, essentially, 14 and 15, the polar vortex. Conundrum, dilemma, whatever you
Should we
want to
have a
call
moment
it.
of silence for
Yeah.
that?
I was the guy that knocked on wood when I said, this can't happen 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That was my fault.
So we had a rough situation. 16 came along, we actually had a really solid vintage, and we were, it's one of these blessings and grateful vintages where you have something to work with. And I think that's the story of a lot of great regions, is that the vintage year matters, and 16, being a moderately warm and just good solid ripening season gave us a chance to make a wine that we could really push to the edge.
Do you want me to COVID hand this to you so you can have it?
Extracting, from the skins and the seeds and allowing that to age in barrels properly. Again, I think we made 70 cases, so that was a small one. But this vineyard was the one that launched our whole perspective on trying to plant more Blaufränkish, and fortunately we had the time, starting that one 2001, and then started planting again in 2010. once we realized it could work. So, you know, I think it's a classic example of what can be done in most Michigan years.
So when we talk about like a cooler vintage like 19 versus a vintage like 2016, is there a difference in how long, let's just talk about Blaufränkish first.
So 16 I would say was a really cool vintage, both in temperature and just being cool, but 16 was not like a hot vintage. It was good, but it wasn't like 12 or something where it was really like over the top.
It was long though.
It was long, and we got low and slow on that one for sure. I can't quite remember exactly what your question was on that.
I was asking about the difference in a cooler year like 19, which is you talked about versus
So what I
in terms
did,
of ageability.
so these two things, what I did was the 19 being very cool year. We took it off the skins when it still had residual sugar. It was still fermenting. We pressed it early, and just kind of opted for that fruity style. 16 we allowed it to really go dry and then sit with the skins and the seeds for a while and let it kind of really pull out whatever we could find left in the skins at that point. In terms of ageability, I think the 16 is going to have a much longer life. I think the 19 will continue to get really interesting for 6, 7, 8 years, but I've always been fooled by these things, and I think that I kind of shortchange them and think that, oh, well, it won't go that long, and then someone will bring one by, and you're just amazed at how well they're hanging on.
What you brought up earlier is to have enough quantity that you can break the wine apart, where that's extended skin contact, that's the one I'll do with a carbonic, that's the one I'll do some whole cluster stems on, and then bring those all back together, and then be able to have a couple different Blaufränkishes or Gamays you can do. And that's unfortunate, we don't have enough in the ground that's always economically, or even to fill containers up and all that. And that's what I'm wishing for, is that more of these things are planned so we do have that ability, because that's what 16 was, a bountiful year. Like, well, I can't fit all that in there, so why don't we do a couple experimental batches and just gamble and do something weird, and then learn some new things, as opposed to I just need to fill the tank up.
So if we can talk just quickly about the same topic though, when it comes to ageability, in terms of Gamay. So Gamay to me is most close, when we talk about aging Gamay, no one's like aging Beaujolais Nouveau, right? It's super gross. But Cru Beaujolais can age often as well as fine Burgundy. It's extraordinary when you have it with 5, 10, 15, even more time on it. And so I'm wondering, I know we don't have a ton of experience, but we do have that vineyard that your family
Yeah, we do some 1995 Gamay here, by the way, so.
What?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that, totally pass off over
Yeah.
that.
Go
So, but I was just, but that's the, but that's what I was saying too, is about that, is just, we do have this, thanks to your dad, this very old Gamay vineyard. Now,
No,
this
I got the
particular.
bottle.
We planned it that way.
Sorry.
So I'm curious about that. Like when we have something more to compare Gamay Noir to because of its proximity to Burgundy and its association with Burgundy.
Well, that's something you hear. I mean, there's Cru Beaujolais, and there's the regular Beaujolais Village and the Nouveaux and things. And the Nouveaux are going to fade within a year.
Oh my God.
The Villages will go for a while, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it's surprising, but the Crus, I mean, when they get older, they rival good Burgundies, and that's always people who in the know have always known that. It's always, and now Blaufränkish, same things. The Austrians are getting so much cred right now because they've actually moved away from doing all the cab blends and things like that, and focusing on getting more genetic diversity and whatnot. And right now, I would assume that the Austrians, for the most part, are leading the charge on the Blaufränkish side. The Germans have Blaufränkish too, but tends to be a little bit more of a leader wine still. Nobody from Württemberg get mad at me, it just seems like at the time. Who knows what's going on in Slovenia and the Czech Republic and Hungary with Kekler Coast and all that.
Well, it's interesting because really it's like Slovenia now is where Blaufränkish, I should say Frankish, just so they can take a drink. But Blaufränkish kind of originated in what's now that lower Styria area, which is actually Slovenia, whereas Gamay is more of a Burgundian variety. So they come from different parts of Europe.
You know what's funny about it though, when I was doing research too, is that
Oh.
there's 2 Limburgers, towns of Limburger, and the Austrian Trade Commission says it's actually like north in Austria, where everything else says it's actually in Unter Steiermark, which is in Slovenia now. It's just funny how that stuff works, but
Cross-reference. The interwebs are not always right. Go back to your books. One thing I do want to mention is we're sort of drawing to a close. We have 5 minutes left, and I'll give you each the opportunity to give your closing statements. However,
We answer questions?
maybe, but we've been sort of answering them.
Okay.
Courtney and Shannon Casey, we all know them, right?
Mhm.
From Michigan by the Bottle. They have like a little viewing party going on in Auburn Hills, which I think is pretty rad. So thank you very much for
Cheers.
that, you guys. Cheers. Sorry you can't share these awesome ones for a room. But I hope you stocked up when they were available on the open market. And that's one thing I want to mention is that for people, consumers who are actually interested, I think we should be, well, I feel like I'm setting an excellent example for this, but we think we should be gobbling up like all your best wines.
Yeah, you have all our best
I
ones.
know,
Oh, you
and
got
I
them
hide
all.
them away,
Yeah.
because I think that we don't make a lot, but after all these years, have been watching the evolution of just, it's extraordinary what has happened as this wine region has grown. And there's a lot of crappy wine made in every region in the world, so whenever anyone ever brings that up, I can show you 3 Bordeaux's that are terrible. You know, so it's just,
Or just boring, or
just like that, but for something that's really able, and I'm looking so forward to seeing, especially with this strain, like 16 to 19 in terms of vintage. Personally, I'm looking really forward to seeing how they will all age differently, because I feel like each of those vintages is quite distinctive, especially coming off of 14 and 15. And I hope that consumers in general who are interested in Michigan wine are willing to actually look at vintages the way that we have historically with Bordeaux and Burgundy and Napa, you know, better known wine regions, and not be afraid to make an investment in our cellars and laying these wines down. Because honestly, with acid being one of those major preservatives, I feel like some of the wines that we're making up here have aging potential that rivals many of those regions that people tend to lay down anyway. So we'll start with some closing arguments. Brian's gonna get the last word since it's his house, he's generous enough. So Sean, you first. And no, there's not a rebuttal, just do it. You each
Well,
have a
actually,
minute and a half.
I would like to take the moment to, on the Gamay side, the person who has the most vintages under his belt in this region is Baron Croissant, my family's winery. Makes a very unique style of Gamay that we're trying right now, the Reserve, which uses American oak. To me, we used to describe it as a French wine made in the Spanish style by a German winemaker in Michigan, and that's the one that we were able to get an aquavit thing. It's a very unique style. On the Blaufränkish side, Adam Satchwell at Shady Lane at the time did a lot with his uncle Jed Steele and Charley, and obviously you from the beginning and all that. It's not, Gamay is a little bit mostly my family up until now, until recently with what the Langs are doing and what Brian's doing. You're going to see a lot more of it, which I'm really excited because I want to see other revisions of it. To me, the State of the Union is good. I like these light style or medium-bodied reds that can either be, a lot more treble, a lot more base, but it depends on the year. If someone wants to plant Petit Rouge and be like the total hipster up here, I'm sure that would grow here as well. But we are in good times right now, and I just love this style of wine. I'm glad that the rest of the country, thank you hipsters and other things that have basically opened up their minds to things that aren't just the usual things on the coast. It's an exciting time for wines right now, for our style of wines.
Brian?
I'm happy that this 1995 was my first vintage working in Michigan at Chateau Grand Traverse. So I didn't actually sell this wine, but what I really love is that the area code on the back is 616. I mean, that reaches back, and I think just being part of this this expansion has been fun. I echo what Sean's saying is that with Blaufränkish in particular, this isn't a recent concept. Like we've been saying, we planted in 2001. I know Charley had some. I know there was some at Arnie Oak's place, and Adam Satchwell and Shady Lane had planted at that same time too. And so we've been on this pursuit for almost 2 decades, and that's significant in the sense that it's proven itself for wanting to grow here. And then again, from a farmer perspective, both of these varieties are proving to be something that's viable in the sense of you can farm it on the land and you can produce something that brings back not just great wine, but also a reason to keep planting it in the future in terms of economics. And that is part of the argument that has to be brought up when you're at a limited edge that like we are, and limited land base. What are we going to choose to put that land into? We could plant a lot of more popular varieties, but is that the best use for that acreage? And that's where I think these two are coming in, where we can find these sites that have the right soil and aspect and grower mentality to produce something that really brings Michigan into the conversation in the sense of a contributor and not just a player or a fan. You know? And I think these two have both done it. It's not a real strong argument against Gamay because
Well, we don't really.
we're about to
disagree on it.
release one. So,
Well,
Anyway, I
yeah.
hope this was fun. The whole purpose was for you, I mean, really, both of these grape varieties clearly have extraordinary potential in our area. And
It's like a 25-year-old Gamay, which you're trying right now.
It's
so,
amazing.
yeah.
now, we
That's
never did our
promoting.
music thing though. Do you have your music metaphor for Gamay?
I was thinking on this way here, and I thought it was like, you know, like when the Who had a sense of humor, like Marianne with the shaky hands before they got really trying to do Tommy and stuff like that, where there was like a sense of humor in it, like,
Yeah.
and that's what Gamay, or kind of like, or like The Cure, where it's kind of poppy music and there's layers to it, but it doesn't, on the surface, you can just follow it for what it is, but you can go deeper if you want. So those are the two things I came up on the way here.
I was kind of going with the that British blues movement of the mid '60s, where you had guys listening to, you know, other regions' music and then trying to incorporate it into their own reality as well. And I sort of spun around into sort of a rockabilly thing. So I think it's more of that, yeah, definitely a single coil pickup guitar sound. And
I'm thinking Billy Zoom from the X right now, but yeah, that's cool.
And we out. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. It was really fun for us.
Thank you. Das ist ein Wort, ja.